August 13th, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The airstrip was barely finished. Coral dust hung in the air like smoke. 19 Marine pilots stood beside their aircraft. Grumman F4F Wildcats, stubby, ungainly fighters that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never seen a bird. The planes were already showing wear. Oil streaks ran down their cowlings. Fabric control surfaces were patched with whatever the mechanics could find. One aircraft had a replacement panel painted a different shade of blue. They called themselves the Cactus Air Force, after the island's code name. It was not an official designation. It was a joke, really. A bit of dark humor for men who knew they were surrounded, outnumbered, and flying obsolete machines against the finest fighter pilots in the world. 300 miles to the north, at Rabaul, Vice Admiral Mikawa read the intelligence report with something close to amusement. The Americans had landed on Guadalcanal. They had seized the airfield Japan had spent months building, and now they were trying to defend it with what? He read the aircraft inventory again. 19 fighters, 12 dive bombers, Wildcats and Dauntlesses. The report listed their specifications. Maximum speed of the F4F Wildcat, 278 miles per hour. The Mitsubishi, a 6M0, 331 miles per hour. Rate of climb, Wildcat, 2,000 feet per minute. 0, 3,000 feet per minute. Turn radius. The Zero could complete a full turn in under 10 seconds. The Wildcat needed 15. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Mikawa set the report down. He lit a cigarette. Around him, his staff officers waited. "The Americans," he said quietly, "have given us their weakest aircraft, their newest pilots, and an airfield we can bomb whenever we choose. They are trapped on an island they cannot supply, flying machines they cannot replace, fighting a battle they cannot win." One of his officers, Commander Takoshi Haido, nodded. "Our intelligence confirms most of their pilots arrived just days ago. Green, untested. They've never faced a Zero in combat." "And our pilots?" Mikawa asked, though he already knew. "Veterans, sir. Men from the China campaign, from Pearl Harbor, from the East Indies. Average flight time, 800 hours. Some over 1,000. They've been flying Zeros for years." Mikawa exhaled smoke slowly. "Then this will not be a battle. It will be a demonstration. How long until we retake the island?" Haido consulted his notes. "The army is preparing a counter-offensive. General Hyakutake believes he can retake Henderson Field in 6 weeks, perhaps less. The Marines are isolated. No significant reinforcements. Limited supplies. Once we destroy their aircraft, the island is ours." Mikawa stood, walked to the map on the wall. Guadalcanal was a green smudge in a blue ocean. Henderson Field, a tiny mark on its northern coast. He traced the distance from Rabaul to Guadalcanal with his finger. "We can reach them in 90 minutes. Bomb them, strafe them, return for lunch." He turned back to his staff. "Initiate Operation Car. 27 bombers, 18 Zeros. Daily raids until their air force ceases to exist." He paused, "And send a message to Admiral Yamamoto. Inform him that the Americans' Cactus Air Force will be eradicated within the week." The room was confident. The math was simple, the conclusion inevitable. But what neither Mikawa nor any officer in that room understood was that they were not looking at an air battle. They were looking at a system. And that system, crude and improvised as it was about to reveal something the Japanese High Command had failed to grasp since Pearl Harbor. That in modern war, the side that adapts fastest wins. Not the side with the best planes or the most skilled pilots. The side that learns. The Guadalcanal campaign did not begin with airplanes. It began with intelligence. In May 1942, American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications, revealing construction of an airfield on a remote island in the Solomon Chain. Guadalcanal. Most Americans had never heard of it. But the strategists in Washington understood immediately. An airfield there would threaten the supply line between the United States and Australia. It would extend Japan's bomber range deep into the South Pacific. It would turn a defensive perimeter into an offensive platform. The decision was made quickly. Seize the island, deny Japan the airfield, turn it against them. On August 7, 1942, the 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal's beaches. They expected heavy resistance. They found none. The Japanese construction workers fled into the jungle. The Marines walked onto the airfield, surprised to find it nearly complete. Bulldozers still warm, tools abandoned. The Japanese had been so confident in their security that they hadn't even fortified the position. The Marines renamed it Henderson Field, after a pilot killed at Midway. Within a week, they had it operational. But operational is a relative term. Henderson Field in August 1942 was barely an airstrip. It was a clearing carved from jungle, coral gravel, not concrete. No revetments, no fuel storage, no proper maintenance facilities. When it rained, the field became mud. When it dried, the coral dust choked engines and blinded pilots on landing. The aircraft that arrived were not fresh from factories. They were whatever could be spared. The F4F Wildcat was, by 1942 standards, already obsolescent. It had been designed in 1937, when biplanes still filled carrier decks. It was slower than the Zero, less maneuverable. Its controls were heavier. It couldn't climb as fast or turn as tight. On paper, it was outmatched in every category that mattered in a dogfight. But the Wildcat had one quality that didn't appear in specification sheets. It was durable. Its airframe could absorb damage that would tear a Zero apart. It had armor plating behind the pilot's seat, self-sealing fuel tanks that wouldn't explode when punctured, a radial engine that could run with cylinders shot out. The Wildcat was built to survive. The Zero was built to dominate. This difference, structural, philosophical, would define everything that followed. The Japanese Zero was a masterpiece of engineering in the purest sense. It achieved performance by eliminating weight, no armor, no self-sealing tanks, lightweight construction throughout. In the hands of an expert pilot, it was unbeatable in a turning fight. But it was fragile. A single burst of .50 caliber fire could set it aflame. Its fuel tanks were vulnerable. Its airframe, magnesium and aluminum, burned white-hot when hit. The design philosophy was clear. The best defense is not being hit. Japanese doctrine trained pilots to avoid damage through superior maneuverability. It worked brilliantly, until it didn't. The Americans who arrived at Henderson Field in mid-August 1942 did not know they were walking into history. They were exhausted. Most had never seen combat. They'd been rushed through training, shipped across the Pacific, and deposited on an island that looked like the end of the world. Major John L. Smith commanded the 1st Squadron, VMF 223. He had 20 pilots, 19 Wildcats, no spare parts, no backup aircraft. If a plane was lost, it was gone. The mechanics worked miracles. They cannibalized wrecked aircraft for parts, fabricated replacements from scrap metal, patched bullet holes with aluminum from downed Japanese planes. One mechanic later recalled, "We didn't fix airplanes. We assembled flying parts and prayed they'd hold together long enough to matter." Fuel was rationed. Every gallon had to be shipped from Australia or New Caledonia, transported by slow cargo ships vulnerable to submarine attack. When fuel ran low, pilots were told to conserve, fly slower, climb gradually, don't waste a drop. Ammunition was counted. Each Wildcat carried 1,800 rounds across 6 wing-mounted .50 caliber Browning machine guns, 300 rounds per gun. In combat, that was 15 seconds of fire. Pilots learned to shoot in short bursts. 1 second, 2 seconds, no more. Miss, and you might not get another chance. The Japanese, flying from Rabaul, had no such constraints. Their logistics were strained, yes, but they had fuel, they had ammunition, they had mechanics and spare parts. What they had, most importantly, was confidence. The air war over Guadalcanal began on August 20th. 1942, 27. Betty bombers, escorted by 18 Zeros, appeared over Henderson Field at noon. The Marines had 15 minutes warning, courtesy of a Coast Watcher network, Australian scouts hidden in the islands who radioed Japanese movements. 15 minutes to scramble, to start engines, to take off into a maelstrom. Captain Marion Carl was among the first airborne. He climbed to intercept, Wildcat straining, engine roaring. At 8,000 feet, he saw them. The bomber formation, tight and disciplined. And above, the Zeros, gleaming in the sun. He radioed his wingman. "Stay with me. Don't try to turn with them." It was the first rule they'd been taught. Never turn with a Zero. You'll lose. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. The Wildcats attacked from above, diving through the formation. Carl fired a burst into a Betty. Saw smoke, pulled up hard. A Zero was on him instantly. He didn't try to turn. He dove. The Zero followed. Carl pushed the Wildcat into a steep dive, pulling 5 Gs, 6. The Zero stayed with him, but at 400 miles per hour, Carl pulled back on the stick. The Wildcat, heavier, more robust, could handle it. The Zero couldn't. Its lighter airframe couldn't sustain the G-forces at that speed. The pilot had to ease off or risk structural failure. Carl climbed, repositioned, dived again. This time he got a shot, a 2-second burst. 50 caliber rounds tore into the Zero's wing. It rolled, smoking, fell away. Carl didn't watch it crash. He was already looking for the next target. When the engagement ended, the Marines had shot down 3 bombers and 2 Zeros. They lost 1 Wildcat. The pilot bailed out, was recovered. That night, the Japanese staff at Rabaul reviewed the reports. The losses were acceptable. The Americans had fought, yes, but they hadn't stopped the raid. Bombs had hit Henderson Field. Damage was inflicted. Commander Haido compiled the analysis. The enemy fighters are aggressive but predictable. Their pilots avoid turning engagements. They rely on diving attacks. Our Zeros maintain superiority in maneuverability. Recommendation: continue daily raids. Attrition will favor us. The report was confident. The logic sound. But it missed something crucial. The Americans weren't trying to win dogfights. They were trying to survive them. And survival, in war, is the first step to learning. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Japanese bombers from Rabaul, Zero escorts, Marine Wildcats scrambling to intercept. Every engagement taught the Americans something new. They learned that the Zero could outturn them, but couldn't outdive them. That at high speed, the Wildcat's heavier construction became an advantage. That the Zero's lightweight ailerons locked up above 300 miles per hour, making it unable to roll quickly in a dive. They learned to fight in pairs, one Wildcat as bait, drawing the Zero into a turn, the other diving from above, taking the shot while the Zero was committed. They called it the Thach Weave, named after Lieutenant Commander John Thach, who'd developed it before the war. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't about skill. It was about geometry. 2 Wildcats working together could defeat a Zero that could destroy either one alone. The Japanese pilots noticed the change. Their reports began to mention coordinated attacks, disciplined tactics, Americans who no longer tried to turn fight but who used altitude and speed like weapons. But the reports also emphasized victories. Zeros still dominated the skies. American losses continued. On paper, Japan was winning, and that was the problem. They were measuring success by the wrong metric. At Henderson Field, the situation was deteriorating. The nightly bombardments from Japanese warships, the Tokyo Express, destroyed aircraft on the ground. Fuel supplies dwindled. Food rations were cut. Malaria spread through the Marines. Pilots flew missions while sick, feverish, barely able to focus. By early September, the Cactus Air Force was down to 11 operational fighters, but they were still flying, and they were learning faster than the Japanese realized. Major John Smith kept a log. After every mission, he debriefed his pilots. What worked, what didn't. He compiled lessons, shared them, refined tactics. The Americans were treating combat like an experiment. Hypothesis, test, result, iterate. The Japanese, meanwhile, were flying the same way they always had. Why change? They were winning, weren't they? On September 12, 1942, a Japanese convoy attempted to land reinforcements on Guadalcanal, 6 transports escorted by destroyers. The plan was to reach the island under cover of darkness, unload, and withdraw before dawn. But coast watchers spotted them. Henderson Field scrambled everything that could fly. 5 Wildcats, 4 dauntless dive bombers, against 6 transports and a destroyer screen. The attack was chaotic. Zeros from Rabaul arrived mid-strike. The sky became a whirlwind of tracers and smoke. But the dive bombers got through. 2 transports hit, 1 sinking. The convoy turned back. That night, Admiral Mikawa reviewed the report with growing frustration. A handful of American aircraft had turned back an entire convoy. How? He demanded. How are they still operational? His staff offered explanations. American supplies must be getting through. Submarines, perhaps. Or nighttime cargo runs. The airfield should have been destroyed weeks ago. Commander Haido was silent. He'd been reviewing pilot reports, reading between the lines. The Americans weren't just surviving. They were adapting. Their tactics had improved. Their coordination was better. They were fighting smarter, not harder. But he said nothing. To suggest the Americans were learning would imply Japanese tactics were flawed, and that was unthinkable. By late September 1942, the Guadalcanal campaign had reached a stalemate. Neither side could dislodge the other. The Japanese controlled the seas at night, bombarding Henderson Field and landing supplies. The Americans controlled the air by day, attacking any Japanese ship caught in daylight. It was a war of attrition. And in wars of attrition, logistics determine outcomes. The Japanese supply line from Rabaul to Guadalcanal was 300 miles. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every bullet had to be shipped or flown. And American submarines were hunting those supply lines relentlessly. The American supply line ran from Australia and New Caledonia, over 1,000 miles. But it was a line the Japanese couldn't cut. American cargo ships, escorted by destroyers, made the run regularly. Slowly, painfully, but consistently. The difference was systemic. Japan's entire strategy depended on speed, quick victories, rapid conquest, consolidation. They had never planned for a grinding, multi-month campaign where endurance mattered more than brilliance. The United States, conversely, had built its war economy for exactly this. The factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles were now producing aircraft faster than they could be destroyed. In September 1942 alone, American factories completed over 6,000 military aircraft. Japan produced fewer than 900. Every week, new Wildcats arrived at Henderson Field. Not many, 3, 5, 8. But they came. Slowly, the Cactus Air Force grew. By early October, they had 23 operational fighters, then 29. The Japanese, reading these numbers, were baffled. "We destroy their aircraft daily," one report noted. Yet their numbers increase. Where are they coming from? The answer was simple. America's industrial base had fully mobilized. For every Wildcat lost over Guadalcanal, 3 more rolled off production lines in Bethpage, New York. Grumman Aircraft was producing 1 F4F every 8 hours. The equation was brutal. Japan could win every engagement and still lose the war. October 12, 1942. The Imperial Japanese Army launched its major offensive to retake Henderson Field. 15,000 troops moved through the jungle, converging on the marine perimeter. The plan was coordinated. Ground assault at night, air superiority by day, overwhelming force. General Hyakutake was confident. The Marines numbered barely 6,000. They were outnumbered, outgunned, exhausted. The assault began after midnight. Japanese forces attacked from the south, hoping to break through and overrun the airfield. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand. Marines held ridgelines by feet, not miles. By dawn, the attack had stalled. The Marines held, barely. Henderson Field was intact, and when the sun rose, the Cactus Air Force took off. They bombed Japanese positions throughout the day, strafed supply lines, attacked reinforcement attempts. The Japanese had achieved tactical surprise, but couldn't sustain the offensive. Without control of the air, they couldn't resupply, couldn't maneuver freely. By October 14th, the assault had failed. Hyakutake withdrew his forces into the jungle. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers were dead or wounded. The failure shocked Tokyo. How had 15,000 men been stopped by 6,000? Admiral Yamamoto, reading the after-action reports, understood. "It's the airfield," he said quietly. "As long as they hold Henderson Field, they control the battle space." He ordered increased naval bombardments, heavier air raids. The island had to be taken, but the window was closing. In Washington, the Joint Chiefs of Staff were watching Guadalcanal with intense focus. It was the first major American offensive of the war. If it failed, the entire Pacific strategy would collapse. Reinforcements were authorized. The 1st Marine Division, decimated by combat and disease, would be reinforced by army units. More aircraft, more supplies, more men. But getting them there required ships, and ships required escorts, and escorts required fuel. The logistics were staggering. Every decision rippled outward, affecting production schedules, convoy routes, submarine deployments. It was a three-dimensional chess game played across an ocean. By late October, the Cactus Air Force had grown to 42 operational fighters, a mix of Wildcats and a few newer F4U Corsairs. Pilots rotated in and out. Some had been there since August. Others arrived fresh from training. But all of them learned the same lessons. Don't turn fight. Use altitude. Stick with your wingman. Shoot fast. Survive. The Zero was still the better fighter in theory, but theory was colliding with reality. Japanese pilot quality was declining. The veterans from China and Pearl Harbor were being killed, one by one. Irreplaceable. The replacements had less training, fewer hours, less experience. Meanwhile, American pilot training had accelerated. New programs stateside were graduating hundreds of pilots monthly, each one with more flight time than the Japanese replacements, better gunnery training, better instrument flying. The qualitative gap was narrowing. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By early November, the nature of the air war had shifted. The Japanese still launched raids from Rabaul, but now every raid faced stiffer resistance, more interceptors, better coordination. Coast watchers gave advance warning. Radar, primitive but functional, tracked incoming formations. The Marines scrambled earlier, climbed higher, positioned for ideal attack angles. Japanese losses mounted. 3 bombers lost, 5, 7. Zeros shot down, trying to protect them. The ratio was becoming unsustainable. Commander Haido reviewed November's statistics with mounting alarm. In 30 days, Japan had lost 43 aircraft over Guadalcanal, 17 Zeros, 26 bombers. American losses, 19 fighters. He drafted a report for Admiral Mikawa. The air campaign over Guadalcanal is reaching critical sustainability thresholds. Current attrition rates cannot be maintained beyond 60 days without significant reinforcement. The report was factual, clinical. It avoided the word defeat, but the implication was clear. Mikawa read it in silence. Then he summoned his staff. How many operational zeros do we have at Rabaul? Haido consulted his notes. 57, sir. Down from 90 in August. And replacements? 12 arrived last week. 6 more expected by month's end. So we're losing aircraft faster than we can replace them. Yes, sir. Mikawa stood, paced. His confidence from August was gone, replaced by something harder. Resignation. The Americans were supposed to be trapped, isolated, defeated by now. It's been 90 days. 90 days, the time frame they'd promised Tokyo. 6 weeks had become 3 months. The isolated Marines had become a fortified garrison. The obsolete Wildcats had become an effective Air Force, and the island they'd dismissed as a minor diversion had become a grinding, bloody stalemate that was consuming resources Japan couldn't afford to lose. What changed? Mikawa asked. Not to Haido, to the room, to himself. What did we miss? No one answered, because the answer was too uncomfortable. They had missed that war wasn't about equipment, it was about systems. The Americans had built a system, crude, improvised, held together with desperation and ingenuity. But it worked, it learned, it adapted, and it endured. November 13th, 1942, the waters off Guadalcanal turned into a killing ground. For 3 nights, American and Japanese warships clashed in close-range battles that would be remembered as some of the most savage naval engagements in history. The Japanese called it the Third Battle of the Solomon Sea. The Americans called it the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Both sides called it chaos. The Japanese plan was ambitious. Admiral Hiroaki Abe would bombard Henderson Field with battleships, destroying the airfield once and for all. Then, transports would land 11,000 troops and heavy equipment. The American garrison would be overwhelmed. The island retaken. The plan required surprise, speed, and naval supremacy. They achieved none of these. On the night of November 12th, American radar detected the Japanese task force approaching. 2 battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, accompanied by cruisers and destroyers. Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, outnumbered and outgunned, made a decision that defied doctrine. He would attack, at point-blank range, in darkness. The engagement began at 1:48 a.m. Ships passed within 1,000 yards of each other. Searchlights swept the water, torpedoes crossed wakes, shells fired at such close range they barely had time to arm before impact. The cruiser USS Atlanta was caught in a crossfire, torpedoed. Admiral Norman Scott killed on the bridge. The destroyer USS Cushing rammed by friendly fire. The USS Laffey, close to within 20 yards of a Japanese battleship, fired every gun, was obliterated by return fire. But the Japanese didn't escape unscathed. The battleship Hiei, hit by over 50 shells, was crippled, dead in the water. When dawn broke, she was still there, helpless, visible. At Henderson Field, every aircraft that could fly took off. Wildcats, Dauntlesses, even a few Army Air Force B-17 seconds that had landed the day before. They found Hiei limping north at 5 knots, trailing smoke. The attacks continued all morning. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, strafing runs. By afternoon, Hiei was listing, burning, taking water. Her crew abandoned ship. She sank that evening, the first Japanese battleship lost in World War II. At Rabaul, Admiral Mikawa received the news in stunned silence. A battleship, gone. Destroyed by land-based aircraft they were supposed to have eliminated 3 months ago. Commander Haido spoke carefully. Sir, the transport convoy is approaching Guadalcanal. Should we recall them? Mikawa stared at the map. 11 ships, 11,000 men, equipment, supplies, everything needed to retake the island. But now, Without naval bombardment to suppress Henderson Field, those transports would be sailing into daylight, into range of American aircraft. "Continue," Mikawa ordered. "The troops must land." Hido hesitated. "Sir, in daylight, without air cover." "I know the risks, Commander, but if we turn back now, the offensive fails. The island is lost." "Continue." The convoy continued. And on November 14th, the Cactus Air Force tore it apart. Wave after wave of Marine and Navy aircraft attacked throughout the day, dive bombers screaming down from 8,000 feet, torpedo planes skimming wave tops, Wildcats strafing decks. By sunset, 7 of the 11 transports were sunk or burning, 4,000 Japanese soldiers drowned, equipment lost, supplies destroyed. The survivors who reached shore did so without heavy weapons, without adequate ammunition, without the means to sustain an offensive. That night, Admiral Mikawa sent a coded message to Tokyo. Guadalcanal operation suspended. Naval and air losses unsustainable. Recommend strategic reassessment. He did not use the word retreat. He did not need to. Everyone who read the message understood. Japan had lost Guadalcanal. Not because they were outfought, because they were outlasted. The realization spread through the Japanese command structure like a slow poison. At Rabaul, pilots who had flown since August were exhausted. Missions that had once been routine were now survival tests. The Americans, they reported, were everywhere. More aircraft, better tactics, coordinated attacks. 1-0 pilot, Saburo Sakai, a veteran ace with 64 kills, wrote in his diary after a mission over Guadalcanal, "We are fighting ghosts. We shoot them down, and they return. We bomb their airfield, and they repair it overnight. We sink their ships, and more arrive. This is not war. This is arithmetic, and we are losing." The numbers confirmed what the pilots felt. In November 1942, Japan lost 81 aircraft over Guadalcanal. The Americans lost 43. But the Americans replaced all 43 within 2 weeks. Japan replaced 17. The deficit grew daily. By December, Japanese air operations over Guadalcanal had effectively ceased, not because they surrendered the sky, because they had nothing left to send. The Zeros that remained at Rabaul were held in reserve, too valuable to risk, too few to matter. Meanwhile, the Cactus Air Force, once 19 obsolete Wildcats, now numbered over 70 fighters. F4F Wildcats, F4U Corsairs, P-38 Lightnings. The Marines were reinforced by Navy and Army Air Force squadrons. The improvised Air Force had become an air armada. At Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, the debate was bitter. The Army wanted to continue, send more troops, more supplies, hold Guadalcanal at any cost. The Navy calculated the cost. 50 warships sunk or damaged. Over 600 aircraft lost. Nearly 30,000 men dead, wounded, or starving in the jungle. Admiral Yamamoto, silent through much of the debate, finally spoke. "Gentlemen, we are feeding men into a furnace. Guadalcanal cannot be held. The question is not whether we withdraw. The question is how many more lives we sacrifice before we admit defeat." The room went silent. No one had spoken the word defeat aloud. It hung there, terrible and true. A staff officer, younger, angrier, stood. "Admiral, we cannot abandon Japanese soldiers. The Emperor has declared—" "The Emperor," Yamamoto interrupted, his voice cold, "has declared nothing about this specific island. We have declared it vital. We have made it a symbol. And now we are dying for a symbol." He turned to the map on the wall. Guadalcanal. A tiny speck. "This island has cost us more than any victory we achieved in 6 months of conquest. And for what? An airfield we cannot supply, a garrison we cannot reinforce, a position we cannot defend." He paused. "The Americans understand something we have forgotten. They fight wars of production. Every ship we sink, they build 2 more. Every plane we destroy, they build 5. Every pilot we kill, they train 10. He faced the room. We are not losing battles on Guadalcanal. We are losing a war of endurance. And if we do not withdraw now, in an organized manner, we will lose the entire garrison. 20,000 men, for nothing. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, heads nodded. The decision was made. Operation K, the evacuation of Guadalcanal. It would take weeks to plan, longer to execute, and it would be called a strategic withdrawal, not a defeat. But everyone in that room knew the truth. The evacuation began in late January 1943. Under cover of darkness, Japanese destroyers made high-speed runs to Guadalcanal, evacuating troops in small groups. They called these runs the Rat Express, the Tokyo Express in reverse. Over 3 nights, they evacuated 10,000 men. Sick, starving, many barely able to walk. On February 9, 1943, the last Japanese soldier left Guadalcanal. The island was American. The campaign had lasted exactly 6 months, from August 7, 1942 to February 9, 1943. In that time, Japan had lost over 25,000 men, over 800 aircraft, 24 warships. The United States had lost 7,000 men, over 600 aircraft, 29 warships. Both sides had bled, but only one side could afford it. At Henderson Field, now a major American airbase with paved runways, fuel depots, and maintenance facilities, Major John Smith stood watching aircraft land, F4U Corsairs, brand new, factory fresh. He thought about August, 19 Wildcats, coral dust, patched bullet holes. They'd been given 6 weeks to live. They'd lasted 6 months. And now, the island was secure, the supply line to Australia protected, the first major American offensive victory of the war. But Smith didn't celebrate. He'd lost too many pilots, seen too many friends die. He understood what the victory meant strategically, but personally, it felt hollow. That evening, he wrote in his journal, "We won not because we were better. We won because we lasted longer. The Japanese flew better planes, had better pilots, fought with more skill. But they couldn't replace what they lost. We could. That's the only difference. That's the whole war." Commander Haido, evacuated from Rabaul to Truk, wrote his final report on the Guadalcanal campaign. It was 23 pages, detailed, clinical, unsparing. The conclusion read, "The fundamental error was strategic, not tactical. We assumed American industrial capacity was limited. We assumed their will to fight was fragile. We assumed they could not sustain operations far from their home bases. All 3 assumptions were false. The Americans demonstrated an ability to learn, adapt, and outproduce us at every level. Their victory at Guadalcanal was not achieved through superior tactics or technology. It was achieved through superior logistics and systemic resilience." He paused, then added a final paragraph. "The Cactus Air Force began with 19 obsolete fighters. We laughed. We thought them finished. But they were not fighting to win dogfights. They were fighting to survive. And survival, sustained long enough, becomes victory. This is the lesson of Guadalcanal. This is the lesson we learned too late." The report was filed, read by senior officers, quietly buried, because its implications were too painful. It meant that Japan's entire strategy, the lightning war, the decisive battle, the warrior ethos, was obsolete. That modern war was won not by brilliance but by endurance, not by perfection but by mass production, not by the best fighters but by enough fighters. In the years that followed, Guadalcanal became a symbol. For Americans, it was the proof that Japan could be defeated, that island hopping could work, that the long road to Tokyo was possible. For Japan, it was the beginning of the end, the first major defeat, the first retreat, the first crack in the myth of invincibility. Every loss afterward was measured against Guadalcanal, and every one was worse. The F4F Wildcat, the ugly duckling fighter that was supposed to be obsolete, went on to serve throughout the war. It fought in North Africa, in Europe, in every theatre. By war's end, Wildcats had shot down over 1,000 enemy aircraft. Not because they were the best, because they were durable, reliable, and abundant. The perfect weapon for a war of attrition. The Zero, meanwhile, remained unchanged. Japan couldn't afford to redesign it, couldn't retool factories, couldn't stop production long enough to improve. So the same aircraft that had dominated in 1941 was still flying in 1945, outclassed, outgunned, outnumbered. By 1945, the industrial gap had become an abyss. The United States was producing 15,000 aircraft per month. Japan, fewer than 1,500. The ratio was 10-1. And that ratio defined every battle, every campaign, every outcome. The warriors who had laughed at the Cactus Air Force in August 1942 were dead, or prisoners, or watching from the home islands as American B-29 seconds turned their cities to ash. And they understood, finally, that they had been fighting the wrong war. They had prepared for a war of skill and spirit. America had fought a war of systems and steel. The final lesson of Guadalcanal was not written in tactics manuals. It was written in production reports, in casualty statistics, in the slow, grinding mathematics of attrition. Victory goes not to the side that fights best, but to the side that fights longest, to the side that can absorb losses and continue, to the side that builds faster than the enemy can destroy. Japan had designed a military for perfection. America had designed one for durability, and when perfection met durability over months of grinding combat, durability won, every single time. The admirals who had laughed at the Wildcats in August had stopped laughing by November. By February, they were evacuating, and by war's end, they were surrendering. Not because they lacked courage, not because they lacked skill, because they lacked factories. In the end, Guadalcanal was decided not in the skies over Henderson Field, but in the shipyards of Newport News, the aircraft plants of Bethpage, the steel mills of Pittsburgh. The Cactus Air Force was just the visible edge of an invisible machine, a machine that turned ore into aircraft, recruits into pilots, defeat into endurance, and endurance into victory. The Japanese commanders had calculated everything: the range of their aircraft, the skill of their pilots, the vulnerability of American positions. But they had not calculated the one variable that mattered most: America's capacity to build, adapt, and outlast. And so, the war that Japan thought would be won in 6 months was lost in 90 days on a single jungle island. Because they fought with what they had, and America fought with what it could make. The sleeping giant had awakened, and it brought its factories with it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.